the Intellectual Gentlemen's Club.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are at episode 11 with Terri Stangl. She operates Great Lake Flotation, and we're going to be talking about isolation tanks a little bit today. Before we get started, though, I just want to say thanks for everybody again for subscribing, sharing, and discussing with us online. And today we're sponsored by Consciousness, and it's something that you should explore whenever you get an opportunity to. So make sure you take care of that every once in a while. Our affiliate sponsors are Onnit.com. That's Onnit Labs. They are a total human optimization company. You can get Alpha Brain, different nootropics. They also sell fitness equipment, battle ropes. They have the Chimp and Gorilla Face Primal kettlebells that you can get your hands on and all kinds of different stuff. So if you go to our website, intellectualgentlemensclub.com, you can click on the affiliate links on the sidebar. That'll bring you to the Onnit portal, and there's also an Amazon portal as well. So when you use these links and go through the site, everything that you purchase in there doesn't cost you anything extra. We just get a cut of it from Amazon and from Onnit. So I'd appreciate if you guys use that just to support us a little bit to pay for the hosting and whatnot. I'm not into making a huge profit on this, obviously. So today with me, again, I'm Jason Abbott, your host today. My co-host again today is my brother Matthew Abbott.
Hello.
And like I said, today we have Terri Stangl. How are you doing today, Terri?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Well, what I have, just by looking you up here, you are a longtime float practitioner. You're a graduate of Yale and U of M Law School, and you provide educational and information courses regarding flotation, and obviously you operate Great Lakes Flotation.
Yep, that's all true. You did your homework.
All right, yeah. So first off, if there's anybody out there listening who doesn't know what a flotation tank is or isolation tanks, can you give us a rundown of what exactly that is?
Sure. The float tanks were developed as a part of research, I believe, in the 1950s. And they are basically a fiberglass, typically, box of water, about 10 inches deep, that is heated to isothermal temperature about 93.5, 94 degrees, which is skin temperature. And it's supersaturated with salt. Currently, we use Epsom salt so that the body floats in a zero gravity, completely weightless environment. So you are in this enclosed space that is silent, it's dark. The temperature from your skin, the air, and the water are approximately equal, and you're weightless. So it's a very unique space because a lot of things that your brain usually spends energy on and circuitry on, it doesn't have to spend that energy on it. And that frees it up to do a lot of other kinds of things.
What kind of things are that?
Well, you can, people use it for all kinds of stuff. They find because they have more circuitry, they can often solve problems. They can approach things more creatively. And it allows them to access and emphasize different brain waves than we typically do in our everyday life when we're kind of walking around talking to ourselves a lot of times.
How long after a soak does that usually last for? I mean, is it something that you have to keep doing on a pretty regular basis, or?
Well, I think that varies from person to person. When I've talked to even some of my first-time float clients, they notice a difference for usually 2 to 7 days afterwards.
Awesome.
The folks that float regularly find that often lasts longer.
It's like an afterglow you're talking about?
Well, they notice there's a shift in how they're thinking and feeling about things. And, that varies from person to person. And as you accumulate time in the tank, that has a cumulative effect. So what one client told me recently is that he noticed that he was not as reactive to a lot of things, that he could approach situations more calmly and with a little more detachment than he did before he started floating.
Okay.
Sounds great.
So you're talking about brainwaves a little bit. So what is, when we're walking around, as you say, what type of brainwaves are we experiencing?
Well, there's generally four major types of brain waves that are going on all the time in our brain. But our everyday aware conscious part of our thinking is the beta brain waves, which are the fastest brain waves. And that is where logic is located, and that's where we usually are talking to ourselves about what's going on and what to do tomorrow and what we should have done yesterday.
That monkey mind, right?
Exactly. That's
the reason I have insomnia.
Right. And that's often a source of frustration and some stress for people. And so in the tank, that part of our thinking kind of like takes a little vacation, which for many people in and of itself is hugely relaxing and a relief.
I can imagine.
And as that kind of quiets down, then you begin working your way through other brainwaves. And that includes the alpha brainwaves, which is the next slower brainwaves where people access when they're doing meditation, yoga, sometimes when they're watching TV.
Heavy concentration on something.
So it tends to be less verbal, more visual. It's where feelings tend to reside. And then from there into theta. And finally, the unique thing about the tank is you begin getting down into delta brainwaves, which as adults we typically don't have in large amounts except just before sleep.
Okay, when you're having that like hypnagogic state before you fall asleep, or
where you're in that twilight.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, we were talking about what's in the tank, and there's uses Epsom salt. There's approximately like 1,000 pounds in the tank.
Yeah, it depends on the model of the tank, but in the sort of classic rectangle tank, which is sort of the original style that many people have seen, with like an Altered States and that kind of thing.
Right, the movie Altered States. Right?
Exactly.
Right.
That would be about 800 pounds for the 800 to 900 pounds.
And how many gallons of water is in there?
I think it's like 300 and some gallons.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Again, it depends on the model of the tank and how deep the water is.
So typically, how deep is the tank? Under a foot, or just enough?
Yeah, it's
to hover, right?
usually between 9 3/4 and 11 inches. So not deep at all. But it's surprising because when you float so easily, you can't tell. So it can feel like a much larger, deeper space, even though you can actually put your hand down and convince yourself you're still in water and there's the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah, I've never been in any salt water, I don't think, ever before, so it should be interesting. Can't wait.
Yeah, well, when they first started doing the tanks, they tried freshwater and had to use like a scuba mask to kind of keep people breathing safely. And then they discovered that's distracting, right?
Right, of course.
So,
Right.
so then they tried salt water because this was the West Coast and they had a lot of that nearby, and you could float just fine, but the salt was very abrasive on the skin. So then we moved, Dr. Lilly, who invented the tank, then went on to Epsom salts, which was much better for the skin in a lot of ways and has other benefits for the magnesium and toxins, but it was also really good for floating on.
Cool. And people largely in modern day are magnesium deficient. Is that right?
That's what I understand. I don't know that myself, but I've seen certainly some research saying that is typically true. And the body is self-regulating. So yes, you'd absorb it through your skin, but the body will regulate how much it absorbs.
Sure. Okay. And I was doing some research on the Epsom salt, and one interview I was looking at, someone asked why sugar is not used, and I didn't know that sugar was had a buoyant property to it. Have you ever heard about anything like that?
Well, but sugar would actually, you'd have some, salt is really good because it's also antibiotic.
Oh, okay.
And inhibits growth of things. So it's a lot more sterile.
That was my next question.
And so I don't think
sense.
that the sugar would work so well for that,
Right. So with multiple people using these tanks, I'm assuming you don't flush this water in this 800 pounds of Epsom salt all the time.
Yeah, the floats would be a lot more expensive if I did.
So how do you keep the tank sanitized?
Yeah,
so
there are starting to be some sort of industry practices about it, and typically you use like a pool and spa filter, to circulate the water through, and then you use either chlorine, bromine, or an ultraviolet or an ozone, something to sterilize the water in some way.
Okay.
And all of those systems have been used, but it's a combination of the two. And then you check the pH and change it out periodically.
Okay. And let's go over some of the benefits for the tank. Like, why do people float other than the meditative state it can put you in? I've heard there's a variety of different uses for it, as far as stress management and arthritis.
Now, does that come from being in a meditative state? Is that why it's better for all these stress management and all those things?
Well,
or is it a different reason for that?
See, I look at the mind and the body as being connected, all right?
Right.
So when your body feels less physical stress, that's going to be calming on the mind. And as your mind has this less chatter going on and begins to deeply relax, that's going to have benefits for your blood pressure and for your breathing and other sources of physical stress. So there are certainly all those physiological benefits. People generally come out of a float feeling good. Feel their bodies feel refreshed. They feel calmer. I've had people that have taken massages and done other kinds of meditation, and they come out and they can tell this is a different experience. They have had a different quality of relaxation than they've had other places. The other benefit is it is a unique environment for observing one's own thinking and for using those brain waves that we don't normally use. And what the inventor of the tank, Dr. Lilly, developed through his research was seeing that our brains in many ways are like a computer in terms of we have layers of instructions, programming instructions, whether it's how we tie our shoes, which we don't have to think about anymore, or drive a car, we could kind of be on autopilot, or how we react to situations. In modern society, we talk about someone pushing our buttons. And that's really an internal set of instructions that if this happens, you get mad,
right?
Or you laugh, or whatever you do is that you happen to do. And the tank, because you're not reacting to anything external,
no stimulation.
You can see what is it you're bringing to the party,
right?
Because obviously, whatever we experience is filtered through our thinking
and our belief systems.
We're walking around basically with our own virtual reality visor all the time, but we call it reality.
Sure.
But it is really a simulation of reality that runs through our own brains.
There was a quote that I found from John Lilly. It says, "In the province of the mind, what one believes to be true either is true or becomes true within certain limits. These limits are to be found experimentally and experientially. When so found, these limits turn out to be further beliefs and to be transcended. In the province of the mind, there are no limits. However, in the province of the body, there are definite limits not to be transcended."
That's a very profound observation that he made. Very, very, very famous quote.
Is that what they were talking about when they say solid state intelligence? Like your body is a kind of a biocomputer?
Well, I'm not familiar with the solid state intelligence term, so I'm not sure if it's talking about the same thing. But what he's acknowledging is that our perception of reality and what we make real is created by our minds. And in that world, there are no limits. In our body, obviously, we can't, walk on water, walk through buses. There are definite limits. I can believe those things all I want.
Or you could do it in a dream. You could do that too.
Right.
And that's a province of the mind, right? So, and we in our lives have experiences, experientially, that help us sort out what are limits in our brain versus what are. I can believe I can walk through a wall, but when I try, I have the experience that tells me, what?
You have to test your limits sometimes.
Yes. Yeah. My internal reality of what I can do didn't match up with what and that gets to a huge source of stress. It's where people's internal realities don't line up with external reality, and they keep banging their head saying...
You set unreasonable expectations for yourself, and those don't get met. In your mind.
Well, your mind, they're reasonable.
Right.
They may or may not be. Okay.
Right.
So you're doing something that to you makes sense. You're expecting a certain results because of your worldview, your how you think about things. And when it doesn't happen, typically people think, well, I just need to do it better or different, or it's the other guy's fault.
Right.
That's
usually the one I think. Yeah.
So none of those things actually address where it is in your own thinking. You're just not dealing with what's actually happening.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to put your little square reality into the round hole of what actually is.
Yeah.
Last time I was here, I came here, it was probably a couple months ago, and I had my first float. This will be my second today. We're going to actually take a break halfway through the podcast here, and me and Matt will float, and then we'll come back and finish up after that's done. But when the first time I floated, we talked before, I've been practicing meditation for over a decade, and it gave me a different sense of meditative feel. It was definitely more immersive than what I'm used to, because you can either hear the birds chirping or whatever. It might be nice to hear that stuff usually, but this was a complete silence. There was no distraction at all. Obviously, that's what it's supposed to do. But when I was in the tank, something that I experienced that was quite strange, and I'm hoping to kind of work on this again today. I almost felt at some point, I kind of got lost at track of time, but I felt like I was so far into meditative state that it was almost like I was in a dream, and I was able to kind of picture things that were going on, and it was almost kind of like a lucid dream. And there was a point where I was doing something in this state, whether it's a dream or I don't know, maybe I had fallen asleep or whatnot, but I moved my arm like in this scenario, and I realized that I had just moved my arm in reality, and I felt the water. I'm like, wow, that is really strange. I'm sitting, I'm here in the tank, and it was totally something I hadn't experienced before. I've been in deeper states, but it was interesting to me that, wow, it kind of snapped me back. Like, whoa, I'm really still here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in that state.
Mm-hmm.
Last time we were talking a little bit about good versus bad, and how some people get trapped in, their filters and their opinions, like we were discussing a little bit ago, that, that something could be good and that something could be bad.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that's run through our filter system as well, because one thing that's good to one person may be bad to another, or
and there's even a more fundamental way to look at it.
Okay.
Because yes, we all kind of know that different definitions of good and bad, and we
Sure.
have those arguments all the time. What one of the things I talk about in the class that I teach is that the very existence of good and bad as equal opposites, as a dichotomy, as it were.
like yin and yang. Yin and yang.
Well, right, it's equal opposite, and two ends of a rope, perhaps.
Okay.
That if this is not right, then the opposite of whatever it is has got to be wrong.
Black and white.
In a way, black and white is an example.
Okay.
But black really isn't the opposite of white, right? It's different light waves. It's the
Sure.
absence of light, but it's not really an opposite.
Okay.
But when we're little kids, mom and dad and the teachers say, well, what's the opposite of black? And we say white. What's the
Right.
opposite of right? Wrong. What's the opposite of up? Down. But
Mhm.
those things don't actually exist. But what often happens then with people is that it's hard for them to consider other ways of looking at something, because they think if it's not this, then it must be the opposite. Or the only solution for not doing one thing is to do the equal opposite.
That there's not multiple different things you can. There's only one choice, and that's the problem.
Which is the opposite.
Right.
That if I'm not going in this direction, I have to go 180
Right.
degrees. So that's an example of a limit to be transcended. That belief in and of itself, if you can begin to recognize what it does, you can transcend it and say that doesn't really allow me to deal with reality. That's putting a limit rather than seeing the richness of the landscape of how reality is and of all the possibilities.
Yeah.
But in the classes I teach, we try to show people how to write a program to experience that. And when they say, okay, I want to do something different. Well, often when they say, I want to do something different, the only thing they can think of is, well, what's the opposite of that?
Right.
And because that's the only filter they have for figuring out how to change. And sometimes that means it's scary, because I don't want to do the opposite of what I did. Maybe I want to course correct 5 degrees, but that isn't even on the page if you're thinking in dichotomies. So when I'm talking about beliefs, or what Lily called self-meta programs, it's really not how we logically talk about it. It's the way in which the brain frames the whole reality.
And really, we don't know a whole lot about the brain to begin with. I mean, we know how certain things, how we can think, but it's still a mystery. Consciousness is still a mystery, and we don't know if it's external. We don't know if it's internal. A lot of people have different theories about it, but it has yet to be I guess, scientifically proven or whatnot.
Sure, but what we do now have knowledge about is, some practical models that may not be completely the whole ball of wax, but it allows us to use some of the practical ways the brain functions. You can observe it functioning in yourself and other people, and have that work more effectively for you rather than to be working against the grain. So, I think it's great that we're continuing to develop more knowledge, but I like to use the tools that are in my hands in the short term too.
Sure. So have you noticed an influx of any floaters coming in from any different sources? Like the people that you see, I'm sure you see all different walks of life and economic backgrounds. So where do most people hear about floating? And
there's certainly a segment that have heard about it from people like Joe Rogan, who's been, a huge proponent of floating, and I would say a number of my younger float clients, that's often the first way they hear about it.
That's how I heard about it.
And then I have other people that heard about Dr. Lilly years ago, or there was an uptick in floating kind of in the 70s, and people heard about it then.
It's all the hippies, man.
Yeah. So they kind of always wondered about it, and then they do a web search and they find me. Occasionally I've done promotions or, that kind of thing, and people just get curious. They want to relax, so they wonder what this is about.
They want their mind cut off from everything, I think is the most desirable. At least for me, that's because I have a hard time meditating or even sleeping for that matter, because I can't turn my mind off. I have a really hard time doing that. And that's what I'm looking forward to more than anything, is just being able to shut off from everything,
Well, one thing that I always like to tell clients when they come for the first time is it sometimes takes a couple of float sessions to really get the full benefit. Because in your first float, part of it is you're checking out this new environment. Like, it's kind of fun to play in it and float and bounce around. And so that sometimes takes a little longer. But usually by the end of that first float, you begin to get a taste of where it's going.
That's why I'm excited for today. That, I tried it before, and I felt like I was kind of learning to walk in there a bit. And I finally was in it a bit, and then about that time it started to we had to wean out of it, and the time was up. So today I'm interested to see if I can explore a little bit deeper. So I'm anxious about that.
So are you ready to get in the tank?
Yeah, let's
do it.
Let's take a break here, and we'll be back in quite a few minutes, and we'll go over our experiences and finish up.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Terri. Okay, well, we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Back from beyond.
Yes.
Wow, that was good. Matt, why don't you tell us what you thought? This was your first float.
Yeah, this is my first one. I thought it was fantastic. Probably the biggest stress reducer I can imagine out of anything I've ever really done or tried. When I first got in there, the first couple minutes was, me focusing on, myself in the tank at that moment. And then, once that kind of faded, I was just trying to, let thoughts come and go. And then I started seeing like some visual kind of stuff, like, some white swirls kind of, and then everything kind of went red, and I was seeing red, and I thought that was the light coming back on. But I kept looking, and the light wasn't on, but everything was red, even if I shut my eyes or that my eyes were open. So that was pretty cool, too. But it was definitely, like, one of the most relaxing things I've done. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I got to go a little deeper this time. Excuse me. I tried to go in to this session with the idea of focusing on certain things. And that didn't really work out for me. So I just tried to get into my normal meditative mode and just try and clear my thoughts. And then once I was clear, I was trying to focus on certain things about, what do I think about this? Why am I doing this? But it took on its own ideas, I guess I could say. It's hard to describe. So I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, when I stopped thinking about everything, and time, it kind of gets away with me, but I pictured myself on a mountaintop, on Mount Quandary, the one I climbed in the winter solo this
Mhm.
last year. And I had this odd idea that wasn't me. That it wasn't me, but it wasn't necessarily separate from me. It was
Like,
more,
was you watching a movie of yours of that?
not really. It was just that I didn't really identify with the physical being that climbed that. And yes, I was there. My awareness was there, but my meat body, I guess, was different than what I usually think it is.
Well, one of the questions that Lilly had when he invented the tank was, is what happens in our brain merely a reaction to stimulants, or are we actually something more than that?
I think that we're clearly something more than just what our stimulus is. When you remove the stimulus, it's your brain's still firing.
That was kind of the
cylinders
thing, is
almost.
they were expecting something else, and if I'm correct, when they started doing this, that they kind of expected something else, and instead they got a whole sorts of brainwave activity and stuff like that that they weren't really expecting.
Right. They realized that there was things going on.
Mhm.
There was awareness that was there. They had nothing to do with the physical stimulation. You know, and so it was an environment that allowed that exploration.
All right.
You know, and so it is a space where you can begin to explore when you're not having the stimulation of all those senses. You know, who are you and what's going on in your awareness and your thinking in that unique space.
The other thing that I thought was really interesting is my brain traveled to the point of loss and grief a little bit, and I started thinking about different people that I've lost in life and things.
That's kind of what I was expecting. What would happen to me, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, but more the focus was on things I have yet to lose, and how I'm going to react to that, and why I should even react to that. So I'm in the tank, and I know that. Okay, I thought about my dog. So Chaos, he's old. He's 12 and a half. He's a lab. He's well past his expiration date, I think, and he's been slowly declining over the years. So I've tried to prepare myself for the loss of him, but I was thinking, he's not here with me right now, and it's not really affecting me. So why should it affect me so much when he's gone and I'm still there? So there was a disconnect for me. Again, it's kind of hard to put into words. It's more of a visual than audio.
Well,
so sorry, listeners. I'm
one of
tripping
the
over
things.
my words a bit. But.
Well, one of I mean, in that tank environment, sometimes you can start look at those emotions or what's going on there, almost like you're a little bit pulled back from it. You're kind of observing those emotions. Right? No, you're more the observer of the emotion rather than in the middle of them. And, you know, when you think about this dog other times and you think about that loss, something wells up in you and your heart sort of feels, you know, large and a little choked up. You know, I've had dogs. I understand that. And here in the tank, you can begin to say, okay, what's going on with this for me and my thinking without being in the middle.
Sure.
So
I felt like a disconnect. I understand what you mean. But I felt separated from, like I was an observer, just almost observing somebody else's thoughts, not my own. And when I thought about that, it also put into perspective that everybody has these thoughts. And lately, the last couple of years, when I look at people, I try and understand that they're on their own journey, they're living their own life, and hopefully everybody's trying to be the hero of their own story rather than the villain. But we're back to good and bad again, right? So you have that, but yeah, I definitely got to experience more than I did in my first float.
I can see that
awesome.
too. I can see how, you know, the first float for me was more of a relaxing thing, and you know, I wasn't trying to get too well. I mean, I was letting my mind do whatever it did, you know, and I almost, you know, I was finding myself forgot to breathe a couple times because I was breathing so deeply, and I never get to that state. Hardly ever have I ever been to that state.
Yeah, I know you always say it's difficult for you to slow down, and it's difficult for me to slow down. Like in just a normal meditation session, it's not like it's easy. And the monkey mind does race away. And some days are better than others. Sometimes I can't focus at all, and sometimes I have a great session for a half hour. But I hear a lot of people that like to get into that state, but they have a hard time with meditation, so they rely on psychedelics and other chemicals to shut your fucking brain up, And once you shut that down, you are able to
Relax.
Well, not necessarily relax, but be open to what else is out there that you're not normally connected to.
Your ego is kind of destroyed.
Right.
Well, yeah, and those the feelings and the thoughts that come up often have evasions or defenses, that you kind of, when you get close to looking at something, that kind of pop up, that kind of keep you from getting down to what's really going on. And that monkey mind has a whole set of scripts probably that tell you where, which roads to take and how to approach it.
Today I'm the hero, another day I'm an asshole.
Yeah, or whosever voice you have in your head about that stuff. Okay, and so when you can kind of quiet that down, you really can start to consider, well, where did this actually start for me? Where did I start having these kinds of feelings or these kinds of patterns? Because once you begin to find some of the origins of it, that's when you can actually begin to try to reframe it.
I think that I've been in therapy and stuff my whole life, and I could definitely see something like this working way better than an office environment, sitting on a couch, trying to, this is more like self, exploration that I think is important that people miss a lot of the times.
The body and the mind has a certain tendency to want to heal itself. I know with the body, you get a cut, and, you have all these things that happen biochemically that heals your skin, and, you don't have a cut. And I think the mind works the same type of way, where there's a certain state where everybody wants to be in that happiness mode. It doesn't always work out, but I think that the mind has properties to be able to heal you inherently. Me and Matt were talking, this is going back about a month ago, we were talking to Brad Burge from MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and we were talking about similar things. And I was under the impression that psychedelics turned off, or actually would speed up different parts of the brain, but what actually they're finding with their research is it's shutting down and enabling your brain to kind of overtake and to kind of run on its own. So it's a very similar experience to me. Me and Matt have both experienced with psychedelics, and definitely not the same, but around the same type of wavelength, I guess. So I don't think people are going to be tripping balls when they're in the tank. Yeah. Maybe when it's more experienced, I don't know.
Yeah, what Lilly talked about is, because he did some of his original tank research with LSD, is that LSD created a kind of white noise by shutting down the external reality so you could more clearly see what was coming up from storage in your own programming.
That makes total sense, yeah.
So the tank shuts down too in a much, more controlled and safer way, where you can also have a look at what's going on in your own storage. Now, the one limit to the self-healing that you were talking about is that none of us can see the instructions that we're using, that we see the world with.
Because we have to look at them. We're always looking at them subjectively, right?
We're
part of it.
Yeah, we're looking through them.
Right.
Okay,
right.
It's the lens through which we see all the data that comes through our senses, that we interpret it, that we store it, that we process it. And so, although the tank gives you some different vantage points, and that's a really, really useful tool.
Like looking objectively instead?
Well, it gives you, it sort of, because you're in different brain waves, you're accessing some different parts of your programming that you normally do.
Okay.
All right. So that's an opportunity. What I've done here is by combining the tank with some additional training and instructional, and then people can get the benefit of both, being able to examine their own programming in a structured way and have the tank as a place where they can apply that and have that experience.
Using it as a tool.
Yeah.
I could totally see that with, especially with some kind of not training, I hate to use that word, but some guidance on how to use the tanks, in that kind of way could totally help. It's one thing to do it yourself. And that's what I was saying for my first experience. I think it was my first experience, but I think definitely I can see with more time in there how it would open up a lot more for sure. Yeah.
Terry, tell us a little bit more about the Mind 2.0 program with the seminars. What exactly do you go over? What do you cover, and what's discussed during that?
Well,
I don't want no spoilers.
Right. Well, Mind 2.0 is the name I gave to the business where I started teaching classes actually before I opened the tank office. I did that for a couple of years, and I began my study about this back in 2007, which is also when I began floating myself.
Okay.
And it's based in part on the work of John Lilly's understanding about programming, and also worked with another colleague as well about how to apply that practically for people that want to examine their own thinking and find out where there are essentially glitches in the programming, because the foundational programming that we all use was primarily written before the age of 4.
Yeah.
Because that's when little kids are figuring out what's real. Where's the wall? Where's the door? Who am I? What's right? What am I supposed to do?
What am I getting slapped in my hand for?
How
what
can
am
I get
getting?
What do I like? What I don't
approval
like?
for?
Yeah.
Well, then that's a feeling.
Right.
Those are feelings. But what I like or don't like about feelings are actually run by your perceptions about what's real. Okay.
And that's, also like what you're taught is from your parents, like this is right, that's wrong, has a lot to do with it, I'm sure.
That,
as well.
yes, it does. That certainly has an effect. But the reality is your mom and dad can do that. But ultimately, each of us on our own write our own programming.
We assimilate it.
We make sense of what mom and dad are saying. Sometimes we agree with them and do what they say. Sometimes we rebel and do something else. Sometimes we make up something in our heads that has nothing to do with what mom and dad are doing at all. We've just put it together with some TV show we watched or,
Right.
or what we saw with somebody do down the street. It's like when the kid puts a piece of toast in the CD player, mom and dad can say, oh, that kid thinks it's a toaster oven, and straighten them out. But if the kid doesn't have words for how they're seeing the world, you can't tell unless you see they're doing something goofy.
Yep.
So what the class does is to explore some of how programming is structured, and then give people a practice program so they can begin to see how it works in their own thinking, how their own programming works, what they're doing every minute of every day, because the programs that we write are the rule of our lives until we see them. And it's preparatory to anybody who then wants to do the deeper work of going in and saying, let me look at what I wrote for myself as a kid that isn't serving me well now, that continues to have frustrations in my life.
I think that's what everybody strives for too, is to try to figure that out and, not have all the other stuff going on around you, and just to streamline it and go right to the source, and I think that's what this is definitely good for.
Well, there's no instruction manual for life. You go through and you try to pick up things as you go and use them in your life. So is that what John Lilly meant by metaprogramming? So you're kind of overwriting your original program?
Well, no, when he used the word metaprograms, he was talking, it was a very technical term about programs that control other programs. Okay, and there's a whole set of them. And some of those are emotions like fear and fight are metaprograms. Learning to learn is a metaprogram. These are more complex sets of programs that run whole other sets of feelings, because feelings are programs. And so he used metaprograms a particular way. Metaprogramming is that process of writing programs and programs controlling other programs. So what I was talking about is a particular act of rewriting a program in your own thinking. And you can rewrite programs at different levels. So a lot of self-help things that people do.
Give us an example.
Okay. So a lot of self-help tools is writing a program at the feeling level. Like affirmations, I'm going to tell myself 10 things every day about how I'm going to improve my life. that works really well if you keep doing it.
It's like it's forcing it. Is it kind of like forcing it into your head, whether
well,
you
you're
like
putting
it or not?
you're funding it with energy. It's like putting a dime in,
Right.
and often these things have support groups. They have things that help reinforce it. But what typically happens is when you stop doing it, it doesn't last. It has a decay.
Yeah.
All right.
It's like taking medicine.
People like on diets and stuff, they often go on and off and on and off, but they never really get to, well, why am I doing this to begin with?
Mm-hmm.
And until you can actually recognize what's the self-meta program and see how that function and where that starts, and then say, how do I rewrite that? You're going to have that recurring cycle over and over again. And that's where the frustration, and often it takes till people are in their 30s or older until they finally realize, you know what, I keep running into the same thing with the different girlfriend, the different spouse, the different job. I keep seeing the same issues.
Isn't that the
know,
definition? Isn't that the definition of insanity?
Well, it's one of them, yes.
Yeah, doing the same thing over and over again.
But
expecting
the
different
person
results.
who's doing it can't see what they're using to perceive opportunities,
because they're in it.
They're in the middle of it, exactly.
Right, yeah.
So the wonderful thing that Lily said, there's a way to actually go back and see where this is. And we have this part in our thinking, the self-meta program, that can rewrite that. Self-meta programmer who can rewrite that. Now, one of the other things just to think about that's kind of fun is the idea of who I am is itself a belief.
Whoa.
A self-meta program that we have created.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was experiencing in the tank a little bit. Like that, it wasn't me. I think it was maybe something like that where I kind of identified as, yeah, that was me, but everybody else is that too.
So I have a question. When you strip everything away in bare bones, to try to, I guess, find yourself and who you really are. I mean, there still has to be some kind of a guidance to tell you, well, maybe you're this person or maybe you're this person.
Why do you think that?
I don't know. I think everything has to come from somewhere. I think like.
Okay. So I look at that and that sounds like that's an assumption about reality.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
And
Matt, we're shattering perceptions today. Shattering.
So that's like, well, wow, where did that come from? Why are you assuming that? I mean, maybe you're right or wrong, but how did you get there?
I just think that, if you strip everything away and it's just, there's nothing there, you still make a decision on maybe this is who I am or maybe this is who I am.
Well, now that may be true. People do make conscious decisions that, they believe.
So what guides you into right or wrong way? You know what I mean?
Well,
we were talking about that too. Yeah.
I think it's more about thinking about ourselves in a bigger way.
Mm-hmm.
Once you sort of say that I am more than my belief about myself.
Yeah.
There's not a right or wrong. It's just a description of a reality that's there.
Mm-hmm. I was watching a documentary. Vice had a really good expose or story or whatever you want to call it on flotation tanks. They did a 3-part series. It's available on YouTube. You guys can Google it. But in this, they had he visited a couple different float centers in California and in Colorado, and there was a place in Boulder where specifically I remember they use self-hypnosis. So before you would go into the tank, you would come up with some kind of ideas of what you wanted to change about your life, quitting smoking or whatever, being a better person, whatever that's supposed to mean. But you would go in and say you wanted to quit smoking. So they would record you saying, I will do such and such to alter my behavior. And then at a certain point in the float, they would have speakers in the tank and then they would play that. I don't know how loud or what it was, but have you heard of self-hypnosis with using the tanks?
Well, I mean, Lily talked about that. He actually had some things he recorded for himself.
He did a lot of crazy stuff.
And there was a whole script called Beliefs Unlimited that was one of the scripts that I think if you Google that, you can find it, that he recorded and would repeat several times to himself. And I believe the script for that is actually in one of his books, too. So he used that technique to some degree. I mean, the only thing I have to say about it is having the sound stimulation is going to, you're not going to have, you're going to be in a little different state than when it's complete silence. Yeah. So yes, it slows you down. I mean, you may be more in alpha in that. And certainly hypnosis is an alpha. That's the brainwave they use for hypnosis. And you can make changes there. That's certainly true. I have read some research that the tank in and of itself, with or without without any messaging, has had some positive results for people on compulsive behavior, like eating and smoking. In fact, it's funny, I had a father and son come in, and they were both apparently fairly heavy smokers, and the father got out and he was talking to me, and he said, wow, it's been all this time, and I didn't even think about a cigarette. And he was just kind of marveling at that for a minute. Son came in, had a cup of tea, was talking, and he on his own said, I've gone 20 minutes here and I didn't even think about a cigarette. And they hadn't even said it to each other, but they noticed. So to me, it made me think, well, gee, I wonder what they're using that cigarette for, that now they're in a state where they're not reaching for it.
Right. How about music? Has there been any studies that you're aware of using music of one kind or another?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of tank centers are set up to use music. And again, I think I have deliberately chosen to have a silent environment because I think that's the uniqueness of the space.
Sure.
I think there's lots of places you can listen to music. You can listen, in your swimming pool or your tub, but you're really not getting the unique pieces of the environment. And the folks that I want to work with are the folks particularly that want to explore those spaces.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Going back to Lilly a little bit, he did a lot of different experiences over the years. I think he was 80 by the time he died, and I think he was probably doing work that whole time since the 50s and all that. He had a problem with ketamine he was using for a long time, and I was looking at an interview he did, and I can see where that would be a benefit to some degree, the disassociation. How far do you think is a responsible way to use whatever in augmentation?
Well, I mean, that's not something that I have a personal opinion about.
Okay.
I mean, in the commercial tank space, I prefer not people to be using here. I mean, if they want to put a tank in their home and make those decisions for themselves.
That's why you do the waiver.
But
that's the lawyer in you, right?
But, undoubtedly, yeah, and the insurance company. Yeah.
Oh, of course.
But I don't have a strong feeling about that. I think somebody should be, moderation,
sure.
I suppose. And I think you need to research whatever you're using. But that's for people to decide in the privacy of their own homes.
Okay. And then there's also things, he was heavily into working with dolphins and interspecies communication while under the influence of the tank. Do you think that he went over the edge a little bit too deep on some things and like contact with entities, things like that? Well,
there's a lot of ways I mean, there's several questions there.
Right, I'm sorry.
On the dolphins, I mean, he saw trying to communicate with other intelligent mammals with very large brains as a kind of a practice run if we were ever going to deal with other extraterrestrial entities, which who knows if we ever will. One of the interesting things is he discovered that some of the obstacles in talking to another species aren't all that different than it is in actually talking to other people, because we are all in our own private universes to some degree. And so we make assumptions about what other people's reality, perceptions are based on our own, which may or may not be accurate. And people project onto dogs and cats and other animals their ideas about people all the time.
Right. Anthropomorphize, right?
Doesn't mean that the animal sees things that way at all, right?
We want them to see it that way. Yeah.
Well, it serves our purposes,
right.
apparently. Yeah. So that's kind of how I look a little bit at what he did with the dolphins. As far as his reports of talking to other entities, that was in the tank space, and as he said, that was in the province of the mind. Nobody can substantiate his experience.
Sure. But when he was talking about the entities, I mean, was that when he was using ketamine and stuff like that?
No, I think it was both.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was. I don't think it was solely under the influence of a drug. I think it was, also in the tank space alone.
Right. He explored lots of states. He really began mapping out different states of consciousness, and he used other people's maps, and he kind of actually had an entire construct of, in one of his books, I think it's Center of the Cyclone, he maps out like different layers and different markers of different states of consciousness. So he was really trying to explore what is this landscape, and what does it look like, and what are the variations. And his, the coincidence control, that he talked about these beings, were one way he explained to himself his own experience. It was a model that he used to explain certain things to himself. And, I think we all do that. And within the province of the mind, people can make sense of things different ways. Mm-hmm. But whether I can't validate that for him or for anybody else. So, people will come out of the tank and say, I had this experience and I saw this, and was I out of my body? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you know what?
I can't answer that.
I can't answer that. As far as I know, that the tank was enclosed and you were in it, Yep. How can I tell you? Come on, you can believe anything you want. That's fine. But that doesn't mean it actually happened.
Sure. Oh, speaking of outer body, I also heard some reports that the CIA was doing, back in the day with their PSYOPs, that they used remote viewing subjects in tanks, and they did have positive results. Do you have an opinion on that one way or another?
I'm aware that there were experiments with remote viewing. No, I don't. No, I don't really have. The problem with lots of those things is how can you actually know what happened? Because in order to have have knowledge about something, you have to have somebody be able to substantiate the experience. Mm-hmm. And and I'm not quite sure what they did to actually substantiate. Presumably, people were more accurate, than.
Don't think they're going to tell anybody either.
Right. Good point. I think that when people are just in a normal state or an altered state, whatever that might be, I think that language largely gets into the way of a lot of things. When you have a feeling or a thought about something, the only way you can conceptualize it to another person is by language. You can't show them a picture of what you thought or what you saw in your mind.
I think I think it's not just language. there's definitely other ways to tell what someone's thinking or feeling for the most part.
Wait. The statement you just made is that there's ways to tell what someone is thinking or feeling.
Well,
right?
I'm saying if someone is super bummed out, you can usually tell. Rather than
language, right?
Yeah, body language and stuff like that.
And that may or may. I just want to check here what the assumption here, all right?
Okay.
Because
you're assuming again, man.
You're assuming, okay? Let me give you an example of this. Is we often say when someone doesn't meet my eyes, I assume they're lying and they're being deceptive, right? Uh-huh. Well, there are cultures in the world where looking someone in the eye is considered disrespectful.
Right.
So if those individuals are in a conversation with you, you may say, "Well, I know what that means. They're this way." Mm-hmm. That's true. And that can be a culturally specific, and so different. So when somebody laughs, they laugh for all kinds of reasons. Mm-hmm. It may not because they're happy or having fun. They might be nervous or whatever. So. I think it's a little presumptuous. Yes, we can use those cues, but you kind of have to check them out. Yeah. They're not infallible.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Mystical states. Have you had a lot of clients here that have come out and said they had a religious experience or some deep spiritual experience?
Not so much in those words.
Okay.
I think they're aware that they've had a different experience and they don't really have words for their experience.
No, it's lack of words again.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. And I think you were actually right, Jason, that words are kind of a rough edge tool. They're always an abstraction of reality. They're always a little slice of it. And one of the ways we often get frustrated or have difficulties in communication is we assume they mean the same thing. And the words never quite line up with the totality. And by trying to describe things with words, we're missing a lot of what's there. Right. Again, like we talked earlier about the right and wrong. Mm-hmm. Those are words to describe a much more complex reality. And by trying to shove it into that little tiny box.
Sure. Well, like a 4-letter word, love, that can mean a variety of different things. Like, I have love for you, bro. Mm-hmm. Or I love you deeply to my wife. Or, I have love for an animal. It's very subjective to whatever you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a writer that you may have heard of called Korzybski, who wrote a book called Science and Sanity back in the 30s, and he was the father of a line of thinking called non-Aristotelian thinking, which was trying to be something different than logical. Aristotle was all about logic,
Mm-hmm.
and Korzybski was saying, well, it's not all about dichotomies. It's not all true or false. There are much more complexities. And he looked at how language distorts reality and how that can be the basis of a lot of emotional upset, was trying to make language do things that it can't do. So, for example, when we say something is or is not in our everyday English language, that's a dichotomy. There might be the you you are right now is not the you in 10 minutes from now.
Or
it's
5
not
minutes
exactly
ago.
or
Right.
seconds. Even the furniture changes slightly because there's different dust motes or there's different light upon it.
Well, if you look at it subatomically, there's always the nuclear decay, right? I mean, what's the law? I'm drawing a brain fart here.
Entropy?
Entropy, right. So your atoms are always changing. So you're constantly recycling yourself. Whatever you're inputting becomes you, and then you shed that. So you have your DNA is programmed to build it a certain way, but it's not using those exact same atoms anymore. Even the breath that you're breathing now could have been, oxygen that was breathed by Einstein or something like that.
So the reality is much more complex,
Sure.
but our little language tool is that something is or it is not. That's all we have in English. We don't have, a lot of variations.
What's the alternative? I mean, other than speech, I guess there's got to be, you know what I mean, to
About telepathy. Maybe we can develop our psi powers here.
I think you start to try to access awareness and thought that's bigger than speech. You begin using it. It doesn't mean you give up on speech. You just become aware of the limits,
right.
And that you don't assume it's the whole ball of wax.
Yeah.
And you pay attention to what are the thought models, the belief models that underlie the language.
They're coming from whoever that's coming from, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And some of it's very personal, and some of it's just in the structure of language itself, like
Right.
the is and is not. Languages like Spanish have two versions of to be.
Mm-hmm.
There's a more static version of to be and a more transient. They recognize a distinction. English, we just have to be is not.
Got you. What is the average length of time that an average client would float for?
Well, I would say most people start with an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people decide they really like doing an 1.5-hour float or 2-hour float. So I have some clients that have decided they like a little longer float, particularly if they drive a ways to get here.
Mm-hmm.
They like having a little transition time in the tank and then, a solid hour. And then I have couple clients that like much longer periods of time, that come in and do
How
that.
long? What's
long?
the longest?
I think the longest I've had a client float is 5 hours.
Wow.
And,
That's crazy.
Imagine you can get a lot done in 5 hours.
Yeah, you kind of go up and down. I mean, it's different. I mean, I think one of the things about floating, like meditation, is that it's different from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And you meet it with what it is at that time.
How often do you float? I mean, you have constant access to here, so
That's
gotta be a good perk.
a few times a month. I mean, I work here and I work in some of my legal work still, so I don't have a lot of time, but I get to the point where, yes, I know it's time to go in and access that space.
that's good. How often or how long do you float for?
Usually,
When
when I go now without a alarm or whatever, it's about an 1.5 hours. Is kind of my. When I started floating in 2007, because I had to drive 2 hours to get to the float center, I would go for 3 hours at a time. That was my standard time for a number of years.
Where did you float before you opened up all? Well, let me ask you, why did you open Great Lakes Flotation? I think that's probably an important question.
I opened it because I wanted to make the tank available in this part to this part of Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
and because I knew for myself what a wonderful tool it was. I, as a lawyer, certainly spent a lot of time in my logical brain and my fast-talking brain in a stressful world, and I saw what a difference it could make. And I had been working with the programming information for several years, for about 4 years before I opened it. And at that point, it's like, well, this can really help speed that along. And there are people looking for that experience. They're looking for that relief. They're looking to figure out why are those patterns there, even though they don't have words for it. You know, they're searching for something. And so I wanted, and I knew here in Michigan, and in mid-Michigan, there are a lot of stressed people.
Yeah. Well, I think there's people stressed everywhere that can benefit from this. And there's a website that you can go to.
A lot of people are interested too. I mean,
I'm sorry, what?
A lot of people are interested too. I posted on Facebook earlier that I was going to do this for my first time, and I just got flooded with comments on, let me know how it is. Where is this place? You know, so that's a good sign, man.
So we're in Sports Creek,
Yes.
right? Okay, so this is the Flint metro area. Where else in the state of Michigan can you float here? There's not many places in Michigan.
They're not. The place in Grand Rapids closed. There is going to be a new center opening in Lansing in August.
Okay.
Called Delta Floats.
And there was a place in Rockford or Monroe, but they're not open anymore either. Right?
Well, Rockford is the one by Grand Rapids. Okay.
Oh, okay. I was thinking South Rockford.
The one in Monroe had a single tank in a rehabilitation center. For a while, it was down for repairs. I don't know if it's back open. Last I'd heard, it wasn't. But right as far as I know, those were the one in Lansing. Oh, and there's another individual tank in Lansing, Core Massage. But,
okay.
Delta Floats is going to have 3 tanks. So.
Okay. And you have 2 tanks here. Do you have any ambitions of expanding at all?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay.
Potentially adding a 3rd tank,
probably right in here, right?
Well, probably yes, in the room we're sitting, and then there's a couple other offices in the building. I always want to have a place to talk with people after the floats because some people have questions and I think that's part of the experience. But if somebody just wants to sit and be quiet, that's fine too.
Yeah, it's nice, everybody. When you come down here, you do your paperwork first and everything, and sign your life away. And then after you're done with your float, she prepares water or hot tea for you, and it's a nice little library here where you can just kind of chill out and absorb what you went through. So
it's definitely a good environment for it, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think we should probably wrap it up here. We've taken enough of your time. I really appreciate you having us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
This is our first on-site podcast. So
I'm honored.
Yeah,
well, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for letting us set up and do what we needed to do and all that. So just wanted to say thanks again for everybody for listening. You can find, why don't you tell us where we can find your stuff?
Okay, sure. Great Lakes Flotation, there's a website, greatlakesflotation.com. I also have a Facebook page, which is Great Lakes Flotation, where I post articles and videos, and folks like Jason sometimes send me something that I'll put on there. So that's a place to go. And I do all my appointments here by appointment, so you can either email me or call me, and we'll get you set up.
Yeah, on Twitter as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You can find the Intellectual Gentlemen's Club at intellectualgentlemansclub.com. On there, you can find our link to our Facebook page and our Twitter account. You can support us, obviously, by using the stuff that's on our website, the Onnit link, the Amazon link. We have some stickers available. If you guys want to donate to PayPal, I'll send you out some of those for free.
T-shirts coming soon.
Yeah, I guess we're going to have some T-shirts coming soon. So I might have a couple different logos ready for that, but I don't know. We'll see what time will tell. So you can subscribe to us on iTunes. We love those ratings and reviews. Give us that 5-star. We're also on Stitcher and many other podcast directories. You can download all the podcasts right from our website. Check out our archives. We've had some interesting conversation with a lot of different people now. Music was brought to you by Secrets once again. It's available on SoundCloud. And thanks again, Terri, for having us. And
thank you, Terri.
We'll talk to you guys later. Hang loose out there, everyone.